I was working for 35 plus years in the utility industry in US and actually international utilities. There were some companies outside the US too. So I really didn't work with them directly, except for 10 years at Southern California Edison Company. So I was manager of their planning department between 1972 and 1981 or something. And after that, I was at EPRI, looking forward to new issues of utility industry from 1981 to 1990 or something like that. So I had a few things to work on. Some of them I failed, some of them did something reasonable. But anyway, it was a good experience, and those are the kind of things I would like to share with you. Yeah. So what I'll tell you is that I know that there are a lot of questions and there are a lot of different solutions which are not yet on the horizon. We are still struggling for those solutions, which will satisfy many, many different objectives and attributes. We all know that. It's a real life. It's a real world. It's not a book, textbook kind of thing. But there are certain fundamental facts that need to be faced. Like there's no way around it. We can't create a solution if it can't be feasible. So what I'm going to be doing today is to give you a little bit of background on what are the immovable facts that we have to take into account in doing any of this solution. Number two, why are those facts? Because what our industry was not born yesterday. It was born 100 years ago. And during the process of evolution, it created its own ways of doing things and ways of not doing things. And our history is very rich of the utility industry, and it brings, besides being a traditional way of doing things, it also created systems which were based on one way of thinking, one way of thinking. And that thinking was permeating in all the different decisions that were made over the last 50, 60 years in terms of where to invest, how to make it run, what the people want or not want, how to communicate or not communicate with the customers, et cetera, et cetera. So those are the kind of things which have become or which have brought us to today. And so today is no different from yesterday or tomorrow, but on the other hand, in totality, our today's situation is very different from what it was 10 years ago. So 10 years is not a long time, and I did not anticipate 10 years ago that I will be here today with these kind of issues in front of me. I thought these will happen, but after 50 years. Like people talk about environmental damage, sea level rise will rise by 1 or 2 or 3 foot after 50 or 100 years. But now I'm told that even now they have already started seeing the damage or the level or the climate damage. So it has accelerated. Now what it does when we accelerate these kind of things, the solution becomes very complex because it's, like Michael Picker of PUC, former chairman of the PUC commissioner, he made a statement which I always remember. He said, the utility industry right now needs those kind of solutions which could be utilized by like, he gave a kind of example. Suppose you're flying a plane and you're trying to make the plane become better while you're flying. He said it is this kind of situation. So you're trying to repair a plane while it's in the flight. So, and I think I agree and disagree with Mr. Picker in many different ways, but this was one thing I agree with him completely, that we are trying to fix a plane while it's still flying, like utility industry. So I'm going to start, I forgot what, yeah, here it is. Push forward. So to bring some focus to what we are discussing, I like to, by the way, this slide or the PowerPoint I'm using, it's a crutch because I didn't have time to make new slides for this presentation. There are a lot of other things to do in the world. So I begged, borrowed, stole whatever I could. some PowerPoint presentation of Peninsula Clean Energy, some from East Bay Clean Energy, some from PUC, some from IEEE. They're all mixed up. So I use them as a way to keep me guided on where I'm going. So there's no pride of authorship here. And I may not have given all the credit to everybody who provided me those view graphs. So some of the slides will have material that I have no use for in my talks. So don't look at everything as if I need to talk to everything, because these are made by somebody else. But this one I did myself. So what are the current concerns of utility industry right now? Not only utility industry, but as a society, as a community. I'm talking about us people, us. Right on the top is wildfire. Utility issues, who is responsible, who is going to do things, who did something wrong, who to blame, what are the regulations that are needed, who is going to pay for the damage, et cetera, et cetera. It's huge issues. Number two, we hear a lot about system reliability, and I'm going to be talking a lot more about that, system reliability, and how system reliability actually is one of the reasons why we have issues of resource adequacy or even the grid management. So I'll connect those. Okay. Thirdly, somebody mentioned about distributed resources. There used to be distributed resources even 10, 15 years ago. I got my solar panels on my roof 10 years ago. But at that time, nobody really bothered about it. It was just some black panels on the top of the roof. And I used to get at the end of the year $4 or $5 from PG&E for selling them power from my power plant. Neither PUC nor PG&E were really bothered about me, and nor I was bothered, except that my electricity bill went down from $90 to $4 or $5. That's about it. But it was like a annoyance more than anything else. But now we have distributed resources threatening to become the major component. So we have a whole bunch of new issues coming out of that. Then I'm going to be talking about the markets. What are the markets for electricity? I'm not talking of the market as CAISO market or bulk power market. There are a lot of markets. But markets in general and how they have evolved to where they are today. Like what made them happen to be like they are working today. What are the reasons? So my talk will be mostly on policy level, if you will, the decision makers level rather than technology level. But because my education as engineer, I tend to go into some technical stuff once in a while. So if I go too much in that direction, just raise your hand, we'll back off. But I will talk to you in general say. That's why nobody is new or old in this field. I wanted to show you, we are all starting with the issues as if they were the brand new issues. But purpose of this view graph was that although they all seem like different issues, they emerge from the same basic reasons. They are connected at a certain level. And I'm going to be bringing you back to that level, like why all these issues, all those problems are emerging as symptoms of a disease, but the disease could be one single, which is kind of flowing into different forms where you want to touch it. So I'd like to do that. Could you go to the next one? So for that, I'd like to bring you to a picture of power industry as it exists today. Now, this is a kind of picture which is used so much in everybody's presentation. Whosoever wants to talk about electricity and utility starts with this kind of picture. And I've seen it 1,000 times, and I really, I'm not very much enamored by it. But at the same time, it gives me a chance to use this to explain to you why we are here in this issue, in this state, at this stage of the game. So As far as the fire is concerned, wildfires are concerned, we all know at least some of the wildfires, if not all of them, are because there's a bunch of wires running into areas which have a lot of dry wood. And whenever the weather becomes so that those trees started swinging or the wires start swinging, either they can touch each other and create sparks, which can catch fire, or the trees can fall on the wires, and the wires then create sparks and catch fire. But in any case, the wires are the ones that cause wildfires. Question is, why do we need wires? And we say, why originally we always wanted to put power source somewhere way out in the boondoggle and make all the cities on this side about 100 miles away, and then we strung all these wires on these mountains and woods and forests and all that? Well, the reason was pure and simple that our power system is based on this concept of discrete large power stations. We have it in the past Hoover Dam hydro. We have had in the past Diablo Canyon nuclear power. We have had in the past Mojave coal plant, which is on the east side of California. And we have another Palos Verdes coal plant in the border of Colorado, California, and Nevada, perhaps, something like that. Then there's a Four Corners plant. So a whole bunch of big power plants. And when I say big, besides the building, which really doesn't matter, the power, the electricity coming out of them. Like many of these plants are of the range of 1,000 megawatts, which is like 1 million kilowatts of power coming out. And with all the technologies and all those things associated with them, it may, and those power plants came out to be because in mid-40s, mid-50s, there was a huge technology development in the technology of burning fuels and making boilers efficient and more efficient and efficient. It turned out to be bigger the boiler, bigger the size of the facility, cheaper it was per unit. So there was the economy of scale. So in order to produce power with the economy of scale, the idea was to make it as big as possible. And when they built those big power plants, it required a lot of money. Like some of them cost $1 billion or near about that. And the problem with these power plants was that they required water to cool certain things because the technology requires water, cooling water. So they needed to have water. They needed to have this fuel storage. And that storage could be pile of coal somewhere outside in their backyard, or huge tanks of oil, etc. You can't put it right in the middle of a town. So they were all created where they're the least offensive to everybody. And by the way, there were smokestacks because when you build coal plants, the coal is burning, so there's a lot of smoke coming out. So anyway, they ended up on way out there. If you go to Mojave and Four Corners or Palo Verdes plants, you will see there's nobody around for hundreds of miles. They're just in the wilderness. So you had to string these wires to bring them to the useful for people where the people live. And the problem was these distances were significant. And because these distances were significant, the technology fact is when you're taking power from point A to point B, and that point A to point B distance is like 100 miles, power gets lost just traveling on the line. You put on one side 100 kilowatt of power, and on the other hand, you might get only 93 kilowatt of power. 7 kilowatt is lost. Just like toaster, in your toaster in the morning, when you do the toaster, the wire gets red hot and it becomes heat and it loses power in the process. Toaster is nothing but a wire with a lot of current going through it. Just like these wires, except they are not in a toaster, they are strung up on the towers, but they lose power. And this loss, and here I'm going to throw my engineering kind of thing, bear with me, is proportional to the square of the current. The current is like amp is a unit which measures how much current is flowing in a line. And if you send a current of 2 amps in one wire, in the same wire if you send 4 amps, twice the current, the loss of that current becomes 4 times. So every time you increase the current, the loss becomes double or triple or quadruple. So the idea was to go, and what makes current high or low? Well, of course, if you have a big power plant with a lot of power coming out, it will have a lot of current. But power can be sent in 2 ways. From point A to point B, you can send the power 2 ways. And here I'm going to use a flip chart.
Their markers are on the podium.
Yeah. Can everybody see the flip chart? And by the way, for some of you, it may be like kindergarten. Bear with me. Some of you may not be familiar, so I'm mixing it up. So don't be offended if I say something which you already know. But basically, point A to point B. So here is the generator, and here is the city where you want to send the power. And we said it's 100 miles. And I also said, morning, Dave.
Sorry to be tardy to class.
Oh, no problem. We just started. I'm just kind of rambling along. So. Just to give you a little synopsis of what we just talked about, Dave, is that I connected the current problems of utility to some fundamental facts of utility industry that are making it more difficult in terms of the choices of the options that we can go from here. And I was just going into those fundamental needs that created those kind of problems and obstacles. And I was giving the example through this chart of the wildfires which take place on the wires and transmission lines. Why are they located in the wilderness area where there's a lot of wood and forests? So this is what I was going to do, and I was just going to take an example. So I was saying, suppose you need to send the power from point A to point B, which is 100 miles away, and there might be forests, trees, and all this sort of thing in between. Now suppose you want to send a power of 200 kilowatt. And I said that as the power goes in the wire, it loses through losses. And those losses are the formula is, which really is not important, is I square R. But the important thing is to look at this I square. More current you throw at it, it becomes double, triple, etc. very quickly. So in order to reduce the loss, which is basically losing good fuel, generated power in the line as a toaster wire, you want to reduce the current as much as possible. Sending the same amount of power. You want to send 200 kilowatt, but you want to minimize the I, current. So you do that, and power is equal to, this is where is equal to I times voltage. So I can send 100 kilowatt of power by having 100 amp of current with 1 kilowatt of voltage. See, 1 times 100 is 100. But in this case, the loss will be 100 square times R, right? This is loss. But suppose I make that voltage into, let's say, 100 kilovolt. So this is case number 1. And case number 2, can you see this, by the way, at the back? If I send the power by using not 1 kilovolt of voltage, but 100 kilovolt, so same 100 could be sent by 1 amp times 100 kilovolt. Same power, same energy, going from this side to that side. But this time, the losses are 1 square R. R is the resistance, which is constant. For a wire, it's a constant. So what happens in the old times, in the 1950s, when they built these big power plants outside the city in the wilderness, and they wanted to bring the power into the city, they wanted to transmit it by using as high a voltage as possible. High voltage became the mantra. So that's why we got 200 kilovolt line, then people did technology changes and insulations. It became 500 kilovolts. Then we have 750 kilovolts, and Russia had 1,000 kilovolts. So this technology development took place to make this engineering fact or technology fact in the business sense. You don't want to lose power while transmitting. So what happens that when you have such a high voltage, and that's why we have grid. Why we have a grid? Suppose your power comes into a house with 100 kilovolt. You'll be fried. I mean, say 100 kilovolt wire is such that you don't have to touch it to get shock. You can be within a foot from a line, which is 100 kilovolt, and you'll get shocked. As a matter of fact, the only way to survive, if you see a big high voltage line on the highway and you're driving and you step out of the car, don't step out of the car. Don't step out. And if you do have to step out, like your car is catching fire, make sure your both feet are touching each other. Both feet are touching each other. You have to walk with your feet touching each other. No, it's true. Because what happens that, or hop. Because what happens that wherever that line is lying on the ground, to some distance, there is a voltage drop. Like from 100 kilovolt, if the line is carrying 100 kilovolt, to about 50 meters, it'll be dropping 100 to 90 to 80 to 70 kilovolt, on the ground. So when you make a step of 6 inches, your one foot will be 100 kilovolt and the other foot will be 90 kilovolt. So you have a big battery connected to your feet and you're through your heart. And you can be fried. So fire people will tell you, whenever you come out close to it, I'm digressing. But anyway, so that's why the grid cannot be brought into the homes. So you have to bring it down to the 110 kilovolts or 220 volts. That's why we have the distribution substation and distribution lines. The process of changing from 100 kilovolt to 110 volt, not kilovolt, just plain old volt. So 100,000 volts have become 100 volt is done through process called distribution stations, which contain transformers and switches and all the paraphernalia, which costs a lot of money. There's a lot of steel, a lot of money involved in those things. So the system design based on the large discrete power stations and large distributed city-type loads at a distance created the necessity to have a high voltage grid lines through the forests or through wherever they have to go. So that was the history I wanted to share with you, why it is the way it is, what made them. And by that, it's true that when they built those lines, perhaps those trees were not even there. They came later. But once you put the line, you have got the steel in the ground, you've got foundation. So what happens? So it has two impacts on the wildfire equation, Dave. One is that these high voltage lines are running close to the trees or dry trees. And by the way, fire can take place in 3 different ways. One is where there's a lot of wind going on and the wires touch each other. Because when they are carrying power, they are hot and they get a little loose. Actually, if you see a power line when you drive on Highway 5, and I can see a line, I can see approximately how much power it's taking, I can see this slack. And visually I can figure out it's carrying a lot of power or not. So they become little longer when they're carrying a lot of power. So when there's a lot of power coming along and there's a lot of wind, slap. And when they slap, each transmission line is carrying phases. That's another technical stuff. Don't be worried about it, except when 2 power lines connect each other, they create sparks, without doubt. Otherwise, we will not carry 2 power lines, we'll carry 1 if they didn't do anything to each other. So, number 2, wind comes, and if PG&E has not done their job, and the power line has not been properly screwed or bolted or whatever it is, it falls. It falls, it's still carrying the power, it's still carrying that kilowatts power, but it finds now it's touching a tree, or it's touching the ground, or it's touching something else. And it could be slow smoldering, because for power line, that tree, which might look like, hey, perfectly insulation, like you can touch a tree and you say, I'm safe. But no, for the tree, for the power line, it's a finite, what I call resistance. There's still current flowing through that tree from the power line because it's so high voltage. So over time, the tree will get hot like a toaster wire, will start smoldering, and will catch fire. The other aspect, yeah, go ahead.
So you said when the power line is carrying more voltage, it changes the character of the line and it sags. Now, I've also heard that the power lines sag when the weather gets very hot.
Yes, yeah. Basically, the sag comes from the hot wire, that's a metal becomes extended, basically. So whether it's current which is making the wire hot or the weather making it hot, it becomes longer. You had a question? Yeah.
You see, I personally feel, I think, like your tower, the selection of the towers, how they so proximity to the, where, people are living and houses are there. There is a fundamental, I would say, some regulations about how they choose the location of the towers.
We will talk about that.
Yeah.
We'll talk. But basically, he's discussing why bring people and houses close to those forested areas.
And mind you, one aspect, say I'm from India, say Europe or any other country, you haven't seen so much powers, this kind of fires which are taking place. Why only in this California? This is the
Yeah, that's a different direction. We'll talk about it. But two-sentence answer is California has become very expensive in terms of real estate, and people are going to areas which they didn't used to go before for living, etc. So there's a whole bunch of policies involved. One of the solutions to me for this wildfire is completely away from utility and from wires, bringing homes closer to safe areas.
I would say it is the power companies and regulations.
All right, okay. Let's not divide. So what I was thinking about is that when the power line grid is out, I wanted to create another aspect of wildfire that is connected to this. When one transmission line or grid line becomes inoperative because of the problems I described, the whole distribution system at the other end of the line becomes blacked out. Nowadays, a lot of people in our PG&E service area, or even in LA, they are saying that although they didn't feel too much wind around them, or there was no big problem with that area. Why was their power out? Because electricity flows on wires. Wires are connected to each other, and once you disconnect one end of the line, everything on the other end of the line has no juice, basically. So the design of the system, by the way, in PG&E we have design of the system which is called radial. Radial means you take the big line in one area, and then you make the little lines come out of that in a radial fashion, and then you go another level of lines coming radially out of them. So depending on where the line gets disconnected, which level, everything down the stream will be also out of power. So it's not only the voltage or the wildfire risk or the fire, it's also the structure of the network which makes it imperative to have blackouts beyond immediate vicinity. So what is the solution? This is my pet. Microgrid. And I think we should think seriously of microgrids, because I think if we had this kind of structure of distribution system where we have resources like wind, solar, photovoltaic, batteries, etc., which have resources enough to supply the power in this area and not depend on the grid, it will do two things. One, it will remove the necessity of carrying big powers on the grid lines, on the big grid. And secondly, it will make use of microgrid operative, even if another microgrid somewhere else might be not operating because of an earthquake or something. In other words, a single high-level grid loss will not make everything else go down in the dark. Microgrid means that the small area where the load exists has their own resources which are efficiently managed and controlled. By the way, it's not easy to do. I don't believe that it's just a question of putting some solar panels and a storage battery and connect them and that's it. No. Microgrid, in its true sense, is a very sophisticated concept in which communications, controls, data, computer softwares, all those kind of things become very important, very critical. So microgrid is a whole new way of building utility systems. Anyway, I wanted to use this excuse to show you the background of the industry to put forth my favorite microgrid concept, so that somewhere along the line in our list of treatments or the diagnosis of the problems, microgrid could be also put as one of the options. Beyond repairing what PG&E should have done or should be doing, beyond looking at some of the age-old approach of building large stations with environmental damage, etc. Beyond that, I think from the technical point of view, in today's world, microgrids make sense. Any questions before I move from my favorite slide? Yes?
Just one quick note. I calculated last night it was $350 billion of damage to the economy, over with 20 per year for over 10 years. So that pays 50 times over for microgrids.
Okay. Good. Keep that in mind when we discuss it.
Have you tried this again?
Oh, you think we have made it?
No, I swapped out the batteries again. Yay!
Aha, aha. So let me talk a little bit about the markets now. As an introduction, I'd like to give you a little background on development of the market, electricity markets as they are today. And I think that will indicate a lot of policy questions which will emerge out of that. Originally, we had our electrical system operated in what we call vertically integrated utility systems. PG&E would have their generation, PG&E would have their grid, PG&E would have their distribution system, and PG&E would have their own meters. Everything was connected. And PG&E will get paid in a regulated monopoly fashion, and the agreement between PG&E and the state was PG&E, thou shalt provide reliable power to everybody in the service area, no matter whether it is profitable or not profitable. You will. That was state asking PG&E. The franchise agreement of PG&E was, yes, I will do that, and I will charge the price which will be approved by PUC. The rate will be approved by PUC. Now, how did, and in the economist term, PUC was a proxy proxy competitive market. But how did PUC made that judgment, how the rates came about? And there's a long history about monopolies and all sort of things, but cut out all the other details. Basic fact is that PG&E makes money when they invest. PG&E rates are based on what we call revenue requirements. Each year, or whenever PG&E wants, they take an estimate of how much money they need to have in 2021 in order to keep on operating. Now, keep on operating means they have to pay all their debts, they have to pay all the return to their shareholders, they have to pay all the expenses, all the salaries and everything like that. This is called revenue requirement, RR. Okay? When you talk to PUC folks, revenue requirement is a big fact. Now, revenue requirement is based on two components. One is called pass-through costs, which are expenses, which like buying fuel, paying people salary, having a building, paying for the telephones, etc., etc. Those are pass-through costs. PG&E doesn't make any money out of them, except they can be wasteful, but they have to be just. The other part is where they make the return, where they make the profit, is based on investment. Investment is measured by what we call rate base. Rate base. Let me write it down. So rate base of PG&E is accumulated total capital investment by PG&E in its facilities, in its operations.
Can you say that again? Accumulated total capital investment?
Yes.
Okay.
It means that whenever they build a power plant, they're investing money in that. And by the way, in utility business, each investment, like power plant, was supposed to take 35 years for it to pay its value to the PG&E. So each resource was a long-term return kind of investment. So you needed stable assurance from the state, from the PUC, that in the middle of my 35 years, if you make it illegal for me to run this power plant, I'll be sunk because I've not paid half the price of the power plant. So each time PUC gave an approval to a coal plant, to a nuclear plant, to a coal plant, to an oil plant or a gas plant, whatever it is, they assured that the stream of revenue that is needed by PG&E to pay that and make money out of it will be assured.
So the PUC assured them
Yes,
that?
yes. PUC through the state.
Okay.
Okay. So rate base, suppose we call it R. So the PUC's profit was basically, and I'm making it very simple, I'm cutting out all the details. This is like a whole accounting stuff. But it's basically rate base times certain return. And when we say rate case, like there was a lot of discussion, people would go to fight with the PUC commissioners, the rate is too high, don't give an increase to PG&E. PG&E would say, no, you need to give me the. They were basically fighting on these two things. Whether a particular rate base, which has depreciation built into it, like facilities don't last forever. So what is the amount of rate base and how much return is reasonable return? Reasonable return means, there comes the Wall Street, equivalent risk. Like whatever risk is entailed with PG&E in its investment should be the same as if Wall Street, some other company was making that investment. So usually it's now running about 13 to 15%, return. for PG&E. Sometimes it becomes 12, sometimes it becomes 15, sometimes it goes to 11.5, but that's a discussion. So,
So the stock market sets that rate?
no,
What is the
PUC.
reasonable, so the PUC sets?
Yeah,
what is
so the
reasonable rate?
PG&E lawyers
Okay,
talk to PUC lawyers, and they kind of debate.
and is that yearly?
No, it's when PG&E wants to increase the rates. Right? If they want to don't increase the rates, who bothers? But if they want to come increase, then they have to justify that. Okay.
What is a reasonable rate of
Right,
return?
right.
Got it.
So, not only but this is the thing which is under their control. This is what PUC is doing, but the investments, the rate base is under PG&E. If PG&E was not building anything, not investing at all, just running the system based on the old investments, they will keep on getting paid for the expenses, but the rate base will keep on diminishing because every year it gets depreciated, so they'll become less and less and less profitable, which is unstable for for stockholders of PG&E because their returns will be becoming less and less, so they have to keep on investing in order to make the money. So that's one angle in which investor-owned utilities always had an eye on how to keep investments flowing. When they were vertically integrated, there was always something to do in distribution system, always to build some more transmission lines, or always building some new generation. There was enough pool of new investments coming in. But now, the load growth has flattened out. You don't need new generation. On the other hand, you have a whole bunch of new renewable generation, which is really coming like gangbusters. So you don't even need the old investments that PG&E had made already, which are in the rate base, for which we are paying our PCIA because they were built in the old times for the customers. So that's one. The second part is, by the way, I'm not casting any doubt, throwing any stones on it, but that's the way the business model was. That's the fact. So, in order to make that happen, so that everybody carries their motivation, PUC made sure that PG&E made their money in their rates, like there was a return on investments. Now what happened, and at that time there was no need for any markets, no need for any resource adequacy charges, nothing. PG&E just went and got the rates and everybody was paid. And the investments kept on flowing because they had the incentive to make the investments. In today's world, in 1999 or something, year 2000, what happened was we in California state decided that we want to go in a more deregulated utility environment. We wanted to have free competition come to utility industry. Utilities were forced to sell all their generation units in the market to somebody else, to private generation owners.
When did that happen?
That was in 1998 and 1999, something like that, just before the big 2000-2001 debacle came about. So now we had these merchant generators providing the service that PG&E used to provide. And now these market generators used to compete in the market for which they created originally two markets mechanism. One was CAISO, which still exists today, and there was also an exchange, power exchange, PX, which used to do all the marketing process. So anyway, but all these concepts are based on megawatt hours, energy. The free market was based on free market on the contracts, bilateral contracts on megawatt hour. Megawatt hour. So many dollars per megawatt hour. Market was a facilitation of a free bids, demand and supply, bids cross, like a Wall Street. But nobody took care of the capacity. What would make sure that at the time of the system peak of the California, like the whole 40,000 megawatts on hot summer day or something like that, who made sure that there was enough equipment which could be stacked on one on top of the other, and the top will reach 40,000 megawatts. It could be that many of them said, okay, I'm fully occupied, now I don't have any more supplies. And that's what happened in 2001 when, because of some hanky-panky by some of the market-involved people, but also the capacity was left alone, and we had blackouts in California in 2001 summer or 2002. So that is the time in 2002, Dave, that resource adequacy question was raised in Sacramento. That we have to create a program which will force all load-serving entities to buy in the market capacity to meet certain conditions called resource adequacy. And the revenue coming from that will be fed back to incentivize investments in capital.
Say that last part again? Revenue will be.
Revenue, that market was created in addition to the market for energy, which was like a free flow market, which did not take care of the capacity.
Right.
They created resource adequacy requirement, which required companies like CCAs, like us, to have bilateral contract for buying somebody else's capacity for that day, for this much time, etc. So that money would provide profit motivation for that seller to build more for next year. Now, what is the difference between buying power, energy, I mean, in a market versus capacity? Capacity, the electrons which we use in our homes, in our factories and offices, are actually useful, like they do some work, like lights, air conditioning, and my PowerPoint is running on electricity. But capacity is not doing anything. Capacity is not doing anything. So capacity is like insurance. It's like having your insurance, but don't use it. So facilities that are created to provide capacity are not meant to provide energy. So the cheapest possible resource that can provide the capacity is chosen. And the cheapest possible resource is combustion turbine, which burns oil or gas, natural gas. The fuel is expensive of the gas turbine. But if you don't use it, that cost doesn't matter. But if you have to run it for 1 hour every year, well, you didn't have to invest so much money into building one, and it served its purpose for that 1 hour. So capacity always attracts most dirtiest, cheapest investments in order to fulfill the role, and you don't want to use it. You don't want to use it too much. You don't want to use it at all, as a matter of fact.
Only in emergency.
Only in emergency. So what happens, and this is where the question comes in, and this is the policy implication right here. If we want to have a 100% renewable future for California, 100% renewable future, which means, and by 100% I mean, I'm being very literal about it, 100% means 100.000. That means no gas, no oil, no coal, nothing. You know what will happen? This cheap capacity option is gone. The next best is we could do what they call fuel cells, or we could fuel cell. Basically, capacity facility means that you can control at your command right away. You don't have to depend on solar, you don't have to depend on wind, you don't have to depend on the water, rains and things like that. It should be there when I want it. So in order to make that happen, you could do it with the batteries, which can be, charged beforehand, or you could do it with some kind of biogen or fuel cell, that kind of stuff. But all of those technologies are expensive. They're not like oil and gas turbines. So one of the policy thing I will throw out, no matter what you do in the future, there will be always a role played by a little bit of natural gas, a little bit of oil, in order to maintain that economics of peakers. We call them peaker in the jargon, peaker. Yes,
But that's driven by the fact of the policy.
yes,
So if we wanted to model it, basically you're saying, if we model it under this policy, we will still always have that. If we don't want that, then we have to do a different model.
different model. Yeah, different. I'm just talking about the current
Right.
structure as it
Right.
is right now. Under this operational, you cannot do without. Well, we can put a lot of batteries, but I mentioned to you earlier, like you were mentioning, the battery requires charging. So you have to provide enough capacity or enough volume of your resources, renewable resources, to not only provide real-time needs, but also provide enough juice to charge the batteries when they are needed, and charge should be such that they can continue when the sun is not available, etc. So basically it becomes a question of exchange of dollars versus the clean environment.
Yeah. And the vehicle to grid is the thing that'll allow us later to trump that argument once we get to that.
Right.
We're encountering that right now with REACH codes in that we've been contacted by petroleum or propane industry saying, do not incorporate propane into your REACH codes because then you won't have a backup.
Exactly.
But it's a dirty alternative.
It's a dirty alternative, and the paradox is such that in this wildfire situation that took place this week and last week, the only people who were able to continue operation was by these temporary generators, which they got from Home Depot or wherever it is, burning oil. Here we are looking at the consequence of environmental problem, like this extreme temperature of dry heat, very, huge amount of wind and all that is because of the climate change, because of the climate damage. And in order to meet the consequences of that, we are burning diesel and oil, which actually caused the first reason. So it's a very strange cycle, vicious cycle is going on. Instead of having everybody buy a diesel generator for their homes in order to meet this, what PG&E said, it's becoming a norm now for 10 years that we will have this every year. That'll be going backwards.
So the capacity, if we electrify all our vehicles, then we're looking at somewhere between 1 day and 5 days of normal building use during that, in those moving batteries.
Yes.
So with vehicle to grid, then we can say, okay, if you see a 2-week interval, well, we can use demand management, or use demand response to reduce the load and by half and get through that period of time. Otherwise, we can simply draw on those batteries and then recharge them over the next few days to keep the engine running. So we do not have, it's a false assumption. It's basically a survival tactic by the gas company to say you need us. We don't.
I know. Anyway, but I think that you brought
So I figured I'd just wrap that one up.
You're right. You brought a new concept which I wanted to introduce, but you did already. That's a demand side. Because we are just talking of supply as if everybody's demand is fixed. It's not true. As a matter of fact, the whole leveling of the growth rate of electricity in US without impacting the economy is because of the efficiency gains that we have made in how we use electricity. And that has been a big achievement. So the equation has two sides. On the demand side, you can do some things like our REACH code is doing. On the supply side, we can do something. Collectively, we have to find solutions that will meet the needs, reliability, and the economy, and the cost kind of thing. So I'm going to move forward a little faster. I think I'm taking too long. Could you change that next one, or I can do it myself? I'll try. No? Yeah, this is the picture of California and how CAISO is the one which is running the system for California. It's BAA, Balancing Authority Area. What does it mean? Balancing Authority Area means that CAISO, which is California Integrated System Operator, Independent System Operator, is charged by federal government through FERC to make sure that the demand and supply of electricity in whole of California is always equal every second, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, continuously, 24 hours. So they are working continuously to make sure supply demand is equal all the time. And they do that on the area basis. Balancing area means that within that area, they can take power wherever it's coming from, take it to the loads. Now, there are many such areas. As a matter of fact, our whole area, CAISO is just one of the balancing area in this big system called Western Electricity Coordinating Council, which I showed you in the previous slide. But we don't have to worry about it. There are 6 of those in the whole United States. WECC is one of those 6. And out of those 6, WECC, CAISO is one of the balancing areas among many in WECC. And CAISO has its own little regions. Go to the next one. CAISO has divided California into 3 parts so that they are basically, from the transmission point of view, are connected. Like the loads and the demands are close to each other. The northern side is called NP15. The southern side, SP15, and the central part, ZP26. And these areas, SP15 and NP15, comes about because there's a transmission line about 50 miles long. It's called Path 15, which runs east to west in the middle of the state. And everything north of that is NP15. Everything south of that is SP15. So each one of these areas is managed. As you see, they do the real-time balancing of supply, demand, and they manage the transmission control. Like transmission is not just wires, but they have a whole bunch of switches, a whole bunch of meters, a whole bunch of other safety factors. Like in your home, you have fuses and breakers. They have some of those too. In addition to that, all the generator units connected in the system, all the resources of power are not producing power all the time. Because our demand of the system is changing all the way. People are using power during the daytime, the nighttime they go to sleep. So basically what happens that some of the generators which are using power, giving power in the daytime, they also go to sleep at night. So who tells them to go to sleep or wake up? CAISO does that. CAISO does that. CAISO tells every 15 minutes to each one of the operators of the generators, you shall be ready to produce this power, or you should increase the power, you should go down, you should stay flat. I need a ramping of so many megawatts per minute or something like that. So CAISO is running all that system to make it sure that everything is balanced. Then also CAISO is running trading hubs. Yes?
On the previous slide in the balancing authorities, there's a picture there about water too, because that's where a huge part of the electricity is also being used. And that's
Department of Water Power?
just moving water around, like that irrigation district down in.
Yeah. But many of those areas not under CAISO.
They're not in the CAISO?
No, there are some balancing areas which, am I right, Shubhan?
Sorry, yeah, what slide was it?
Yeah, like in CAISO, there are some certain areas in this service area which are not controlled by CAISO, like their transmission system.
Yeah, like the munis, like
Munis,
Spencer,
yeah. Irrigation districts, those kind of things, yeah.
But those also are under stress with, like, during the drought, there's a challenge of where they.
Yeah, so what they do is that they do trading, like they interconnect. So there's import-exports from one area to the other. Yeah, it is there. As a matter of fact, CAISO is doing interchange with Pacific Northwest. There's a lot of water power which comes into California. They are selling and buying power from Arizona all the way to Nevada, every place like that. So they're import exports. But for its own system, it has to do the balancing either by its own resources or by import exporting. Next one, go beyond that. So in energy, I mentioned basically, there are many different ways of acquiring sources unless you are producing your own. One is to sign contracts, like we do a lot of long-term power contracts. We have IPPs sometimes in which we actually had this 200 megawatts of solar, 300 now, or 300 megawatts of solar. We did the IPP in the sense that we promised to them that for the next 20 years,
One is 25, one is 15.
121, 115, that we'll buy power. And they take this agreement with Peninsula Clean Energy, and they take it to the bank and they say, okay, here's my money that's coming to the power plant. You loan me the money, mortgage money, to build the power plant, okay, to solar power plant. So we got many of those IPPs going on to buy power. By power, I mean not capacity, just megawatt hours, just energy, okay? Because I hope I made clear what's capacity and what is megawatt hour. They're two different things here. So you can do the transaction of the energy through bilateral wholesale markets. Now there's another CAISO day ahead market. Like day ahead means that every day, was it 10 or 11 o'clock, CAISO invites bids from both suppliers and users for the next day. How much power or how much energy they need or supply at what cost. So they have all these kind of hundreds of thousands of bids by 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock every day. Then by 1 o'clock, they match them. Like total demand is so much and total supply is this much. That's the point in which these intersect, like where's the balance. So they inform, I'm sorry, Rick, you provided the bid, but your resource is not going to be used because it's too much for tomorrow. But your resource will be used, etc. So they inform then people who participate in the market, who is going to run, who is not going to run, what price has been settled, because everybody pays the same price for that, and the time for which they are supposed to generate their power. And then there's a real-time market, which is like 15 minutes. Because even though everybody has planned very well the day ahead, by the time next day comes, that day might have different climate, different weather, different whatever. There might be some transmission line that bonked out. Some resources may not be available. So there might be some correction needed on previous day's plan. So there's a 15 minutes ahead market. Then there's always a physical transaction, like I can make a contract with the counterparty that they will actually provide me electricity for my customers, like Peninsula Clean Energy. But I could be actually a speculator. I could actually go into energy market and I would buy and sell. It could be, I'm not really using electricity. I am hoping that I'm going to buy low and sell high kind of thing. So there could be those kind of transactions too. Then finally, there's a inter-scheduling coordinator transactions, which is last minute. Like suppose there are by the way, the energy that is scheduled by CAISO is done through who we call scheduling coordinators. These are the people who represent, who are qualified by CAISO, who are responsible by CAISO, and all the financial transactions are squared off for these scheduling coordinators. And we, like Peninsula Clean Energy, has our own scheduling coordinator who does our bids on our behalf, who manages all these bid process for us, for Peninsula Clean Energy. So all these scheduling coordinators themselves might find that although I coordinated 50 megawatt hour for Peninsula Clean Energy, but I only need 35, I've got 15 megawatt hours spare today. On the other hand, somebody else for Santa Clara Valley might need some power because they were not enough. So we can actually transact with them. So there's a lot of these inter-scheduling coordinator transactions going on. Next one. Now the question comes, how do you sign a contract when the prices are changing? And energy prices, I can tell you, they are changing all the time. They're changing all the time. Let's go to the next slide. Because what is happening, if you look at the total picture of how California electricity is produced, 56% of the fuel of California electricity is natural gas. Today, it's natural gas. And anytime natural gas prices go up and down, guess what? Electricity cost goes up and down. But right now, we also have 27% of renewables. But guess what? These renewables, are, just because they are there in megawatts, doesn't mean that they are producing so many megawatts, because it may be a cloudy day. It may be a sunny day. It may be a windy day. It may not be a windy day. So these megawatts have their own uncertainty. So their supply may not be as they want. Then we have some very, large part from hydro. Hydro may be impacted, like Pacific Northwest. The season may have been plentiful rain, may not be. So on and so forth. So basically, the next one, please. And natural gas prices are basically going all over the place. This is a month by month between 2017 and 2019. Their gas price, so many dollars per million BTU. And look at that. Look at the spectrum, going anywhere from 40 price to all the way to 240, 6 times. And this is what 50% was being used as a fuel for electricity. So this becomes very important. It creates a lot of uncertainty in our electricity production cost. Next one. Another one is weather. What happens with the weather is that when the temperature go up, everybody uses air conditioners. When the temperatures don't go up, who uses electricity? So basically, electricity demand goes up on certain days because of the weather and stays below, and which is uncertain. So the price of electricity itself, because there's only demand supply, will go up on those days. Next one. That's another one in which, look at this. Hydrology. Like, we have 4 or 5 years of dry weather in California, a drought. Finally, we got a couple of years of reasonable rain. Our snowpack is sometimes high, not high, etc., etc. So, for example, right now, our storage, this is the % storage of the Central California of the water for coming year. This is this year, 2019. This was last year. This is the average. So we are average right now in terms of the hydro condition. But there have been years like 2014 and 1976. This is the lowest. 2014, 2015, that's the minimum. So in 2014, our water level was way below the average. So wherever there's a water plant, electric plant, it won't run. All right, next one. So what has happened? Another thing is, everybody talks about duck curve. This is duck curve. Basically, our use of electricity is like this on the top. The top line is the use of electricity. These are the hours of the day, 0 hour to 24 hours. These are the megawatts, going from anywhere from 14,000 here to 29,000 there. So you see, at the night time, there's a midnight, morning comes, we go up, we are doing our business. In the evening, like 5, 6 o'clock, we are on the top, we are coming down and go to sleep. This small section, like this one, the belly of the duck, if you will, is made up of wind and solar generation in California. So basically what happens that during the daytime, these resources produce power, so their own power, the other fossil fuels don't have to produce power. It was only solar and wind. So the power produced by the traditional resources becomes like this. Now this is good, this is clean energy. If we did not have this, we would have this color all the way up like the normal was. We'll be producing a lot of bad environmental gases and all that. So we have saved all that, but what we have done is to create a problem. The power coming from the traditional resources has to go down very quickly, then stay down, then it has to go up very quickly. Like from 2 o'clock in the afternoon to 5 o'clock in the afternoon, 3 hours, the load coming from those traditional resources has to go up from almost 18,000 to 25,000, 7,000 megawatts of power. So in this region, all these power plants have to be told to get started, and not only get started, but start producing. And many of the power plants can't do that. They can't just go right on the bit. So right now, our Kaizo is suffering very highly on this ability to meet up those demands. There have been times last year, and you won't believe it, there have been times where they had to refuse the output coming from solar and wind during the daytime because they could not use it. They had to keep this level high enough in order for the power plants which are running so that they can continue from this side of the house to that side of the house of the day. So there was so much power, if you included solar and wind, that it was supply was more than demand. And in electricity, there's no way around it. It doesn't have any storage. It just, if you run a system where the supply is more than demand, you know what will happen? All your clocks will run faster. Like instead of 1 hour, 1 hour will be done in 30 minutes. It runs faster. Your blenders will all burn. Many of the equipment that is run on timers, like your computers, there's a timer, they're based on frequency, like 60 cycles frequency, which is like one of the 10 commandments. Thou shalt not fool around with frequency, because that runs all the clocks of the whole America. So you cannot have supply-demand balance. So they would rather have, actually there were times when the supplier had to pay in order to keep on pushing the electricity into the grid. Negative pricing. Anyway, so this is a challenge. Go ahead.
Ready?
Ah,
Back on that.
yeah, go back.
So, in these conditions, when we get the excess power during the day, couldn't we possibly take that excess power and put it to use, creating some storage of power?
Yes, of course.
Okay.
Yes.
So, for instance, just something simple I thought of. We could take water
Yes.
that has moved from a higher point to a lower
Yes.
point, creating energy, and it's
Yeah.
stored in a
Yeah.
lower lake.
Yeah.
I think it might already be being done.
Yes.
Pump it back up to the higher lake.
Yes. Yes.
We could do more of that, right?
Yeah,
With
actually-
excess energy.
Actually, 1935, going back in
Yeah.
1935,
But there must be some more creative ways we can use that.
in the Yosemite area, there's an area called Big Creek,
Mhm.
and Southern California Edison Company had 110 megawatts of pumped storage. Pumped storage is exactly what you said.
Yeah.
Exactly what you said. Because what they did was that in pumped storage, they had nuclear and coal, and nuclear and coal have this problem, the power plants, that they require days to shut off and days to start. I mean, once you get them going, you just keep on going until you turn them off for maintenance. So what happens that, the load goes up and down at night time. So they actually use that, it's called pumped storage.
Okay.
So they would create a lake
Yeah.
at a high level
I want to know.
and a low level, and they have this huge amount of pumps, electric pumps. And during the time when there's excess power, they'll run the pump backwards. Water is being pumped, and during the daytime, they have the same pumps running backwards, become generators, and they will be producing electricity for the system.
So if we then, I'm thinking about how we could do this with batteries. We'd have to have a lot of batteries, right? And batteries that you could use at different times during the night. You can release the energy from these batteries, from those batteries. Why don't we do that?
Two reasons why we don't do that. One is it's very capital intensive because building two lakes, not only from the environmental point of view, which is like,
No, I mean batteries.
Batteries.
oh, batteries,
Using
okay.
the SX energy to
Yeah,
store in
yeah.
batteries.
Yeah, but battery is a solution, yeah, definitely. We should do that.
It used to be expensive,
And now it's not as expensive.
and it's gonna be less.
Right.
Yeah, storage is the answer. As a matter of fact, we are stating the solution in our face. Like it's not a
And
big.
that's how we could take and actually continue to use stored electricity.
As a matter of fact, what we should
Instead
have.
of at night where
Yeah.
all of that dirty energy comes back
Yeah,
up.
yeah.
We could go through the night with stored electricity.
The only thing is that bringing it back to supply demand matching. If we had all renewable resources, sometimes those batteries will be used to make that up and down balanced. So you have to take into account not only filling the valleys or providing the power economically, but also for the purpose of keeping systems secure. So the calculation of how much battery, how to control the discharge or recharging process is complex. It's not simple battery kind of thing. That's what I meant in microgrid. In microgrid also, you have to supply demand balance, and everything is based on sun, which goes up and down. Your batteries have to come into the play, instant by instant kind of thing. So you're absolutely right. You're on the right track, and that's a part of the solution, I think. Go ahead.
Just to put Rick at ease,
Thanks.
we're actually, there's a Senate Bill 772 of Arthur Stephen Bradford that's on pump storage that's in the Capitol right now that we're actually working on.
Pump storage.
Yeah,
Oh, great. Where?
772, Senate Bill 772.
No, I mean, say, where will it be located?
Oh, that's one of the issues.
Oh, yeah, that's because one of the things is about locating anything in the wilderness.
Yeah, environmental impacts. I mean, yeah.
I don't know. Yes.
Well, you talked earlier about there's two sides to this whole thing. We can also work to reduce demand.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
And
Yes.
why make more energy if we could just reduce our need to use it?
Definitely. But on the other hand, I would like to pose this question to you. We are also, in order to protect the environment, quality of environment, we are encouraging EVs, electrical vehicles. So a lot of transportation needs which are being met by oil today will be moving to electricity, right? There'll be an additional demand, I mean.
Right. Yeah.
So,
But we have to solve that storage problem, or else nobody can get to work when we have our power outages.
exactly right, exactly
So,
right.
Freddie, overnight, while we're charging our cars,
Yes.
we're using that dirtier energy.
Unless you got solar.
Yeah, unless you have
And
stored
storage.
solar.
Yeah, right now you're doing that, but we were just talking about this issue. Every battery, no matter whether it's inside an electrical vehicle or on the wall of a house or in a power station, is a battery. You can charge it, you can discharge it. Both ways, right? So a battery in an electrical vehicle is also a battery for power system, if it's connected. Okay? So a battery in a EV on a control system basis, we have to match instantaneously supply demand. A power company can go back and forth in the battery and actually use your car's battery to provide current to some place which in the neighborhood because they turned on a switch. But by the time you come in the morning, you'll have your car battery charged. So in the other words, what I'm saying, the electrical vehicle battery storage as a total represents a resource besides the load. Because people are not going to connect the batteries only when there's a current going into the battery all the time. They just leave it. And during that point in time, the battery is a free resource. You didn't even invest in it. Somebody else did. So that thing should be also pulled into the policy side. And once you have every car, electrical vehicle, not just a few. Just think, and these car batteries are big. When you look at a Tesla or something like that, they carry a lot of power.
100 kilowatt hours.
Yeah, 100 kilowatt hours. 100 kilowatt hours of battery power connected to you, because once you put those plug into your socket, for electrical system, you are part of the system.
So
Anyway.
we're paying for it and they're using it. And they're selling it.
Yes, 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 yes.
So Pradeep, at the high level, what's the prognosis for, energy storage at the kind of scale that would be needed here to deal with that duck curve problem? I mean, that would be a monumental amount of storage, wouldn't it?
Yes, that was the question I was talking to Mark earlier about it, is that storage is a solution, but storage has to be supplemented because storage, what I call per unit movement of energy, controllable energy, may not be the cheapest way of doing it, at least the amount we need right now. So we need to have some big solutions like pumped storage kind of thing, or some kind of friendly fuel cells, or geothermal, I think, is a controllable natural resource, although it has its own impact on GHG gases. So to answer your question, Dave, I don't know what the answer is, but we'll need the storage, we'll need biogeneration, we'll need lots of batteries, and we'll need a new structure of the transmission system so that all these things can work together in coordination with each other. Go ahead.
Because of the fires and because of PG&E's incompetence, we really are looking at $350 billion worth of economic losses in the next 10 years, and that is a big hit on the state economy. It's a bigger hit on individuals who are in the way of it. So what that means is that the old rules no longer apply in terms of pricing what's effective. So there's the value of a battery storage, say some stationary storage in addition to the storage in the vehicle. You can do what would have been called overkill in order to make it all work, because if you make it all work, you won't have those losses, which are much greater than the cost of making it all work.
No, I understand, the losses when power shut off are immense.
Right, and so therefore, we now have an opportunity to go in and push for, and basically push both stationary storage for battery, and with the solar system to suck up the solar energy in the day and use it when it's needed, and the conversion to electric vehicles. And we're killing 5 birds with one stone, because we're getting the greenhouse gas reduction, we're losing the hemorrhage of money off to the oil industry. All these different things happen, and when you add up the economic benefits of those and the follow-on effects of the economic benefits, you're going to see enormous value, way past the cost of doing it.
One of the biggest culprit right now, Dave, is on a typical day, this was July 25 last year, this is from 12 in the afternoon to 12 midnight, almost 51% of the power that was generated came out of natural gas, almost 50%. So there's a huge natural gas backbone in the electrical system right now. And it has 2 attributes that are making it very difficult to dispose of. One is that the network of pipes, gas pipelines in the area, and the storage and utilities of gas make it an easy fuel to use and distribute in all the areas. Number 2, the gas technology of gas turbines and all that, they are nice and controllable and fit into the existing system of running the system very nicely. So both of these things provide some kind of inertia in moving away, because you have investments in those gas pipelines. And then you have the inertia of the technology that is based on controllability of the natural gas. So once we have these two areas attacked in some positive way of resources, non-gas resources, I think we can see the daylight. But to me, that's a big picture, looking at those two big pictures. Like we can fuss around, we can stop using gas here or there, but this is big picture, there's 50%.
Strategic
Yeah.
policy.
Yeah.
Are the imports also probably natural gas?
Could be natural gas, or imports could be even wind from Texas. There's a lot of wind generation. Yeah, import. Yeah,
When you project this into, say, 20 years from now,
yeah.
how does it change?
Okay.
Because if you're going to have all the solar that's coming online, the wind that's coming online, how does that?
Oh, something happened. First thing is, in 20 years, I think this will change. The top line, I think this is the load as it exists today, where you pointed out the demand side. So first thing is there will be demand side flexibility, which will be based on time of the day. There will be new rates, time of use rates we are talking about today, is to actually push some of the electrical loads like drying clothes that could be done at midnight. Why do you have to do it in the 6 o'clock in the evening when everybody else is using power, et cetera, et cetera. So this will change. Perhaps it will become flat or whatever it is, I don't know. Second thing, I feel this will be replaced. The whole fossil fuel area will be replaced by combination of natural resources, like we're talking about, not only storage, like battery storage, but also good clean technologies. It could be, as I said, geothermal, or it could be biomass, or it could be hydro development, or it could be some other technology, I don't know. But the system will work with both demand and supply working together. Like right now, CAISO sends signals to only supply side, do up and down, go up and down. What I want is CAISO to send signals to an apartment complex too, that hey, I want you to reduce the power right now, your use right now, and I'll give you credit for that, et cetera, et cetera. You know, some pre-arranged arrangement. So it should be a total demand supply side attack on the issue, not just supply side. We look too much closely on supply side alone. Actually, we have a good vehicle to do that, Shaban. We have IRP, Integrated Resource Plan. Integrated Resource Plan is a requirement of PUC to all of us, like Peninsula Clean Energy. Here we are supposed to show how we're going to move towards that 20-year vision like you're talking about. And I think there we have to explain how demand side pictures will come in. And by the way, demand side was in 1970, mid-70s, that was the first time, and we used to call it load management at that time. In 73, 72, there was an oil embargo. The oil prices, at that time, oil was the one which is used in, not gas. It went from $2 a barrel in February of 1973 or 74 to $19 by November of that year. 8 times. So the electric companies which are burning oil day in and day out, besides the nuclear and coal, suddenly found they're paying bills which are pass-through costs, which are humongous. As a matter of fact, that was the time when PUC went to an emergency meeting, Dave, and they created a new rate component. It was called Fuel Cost Adjustment, FAC. So in that fuel cost adjustment, the utilities did not even have to go to PUC. They will just increase at the end of the year the rate to meet their fuel costs. So it was the first time when the rates were increased without PUC doing anything. It was automatic. Fuel cost adjustment, FCA. So what I'm saying is that was the time when load management came into the being, because utilities were not making any money on it, but they were getting all kinds of complaints from customers, paying so much for the electricity. So they said, okay, we'll meet you halfway. When I tell you to shut off your air conditioner, you should shut off. And I won't shut it off completely, I'll give you control. So that the air conditioner cycle, up and down, you know, you set the thermostat, and like furnace, air conditioners will run sometime, compressor, Then they will say, okay, temperature reached, compressor off, just fan running, then compressor on, cycle. So this cycle is about 30% of the time, like 30% is on, 70% is off. So utility wanted to control that to make it 10% cycle. In the other words, there'll be a little bit of warmth produced because instead of 30%, you will be running 10% of the time. So it'll be cooler, but not cool enough for 2 hours or 3 hours of the peak time. And in return, they'll be getting $15 per hour or some silly deal like that, commission in their monthly bill. So that was the time in 1975 that load management came about. Then it changed the name into demand side. And demand side included not only shutting off air conditioners, partially, but also moving some loads from on peak to off peak. So that, as I mentioned, like, in the industry, they have a lot of loads that they can do anytime, 24 hours cycle, like they're drying and agricultural, those kind of things. So there was a huge amount of load fattening, demand side management. And that was part of the IRP. That was the time in 1983 or so that this term, integrated resource planning, was coined at EPRI. And where the demand side picture on one side, supply side was combined together. At what cost utility can provide incentives to the customers to do demand side changes in order to meet their supply side constraints. So it created a lot of, for the first time, utilities were bothered about their customers beyond the meter, right? Instead of just having the meter reader come read your meter, they don't know who you are, what you do with electricity, no. That was the first time they went inside the house saying, your air conditioner we want to control. Or your clothes dryer we would like to change. Or we would like you to change your bulbs from these good old energy wasting bulbs to some sodium bulbs in those days, or LEDs, those kind of things. So that was the metamorphosis, I think, that took place in 1980s and 1990s, where the whole idea of conservation, efficiency, and load management and demand side management, integrated resource planning came about. And Energy Commission of California Energy Commission came out into being in 1976, where for the first time, besides PUC was existing all the time, but 1976, California Energy Commission came into being to make sure to develop these efficiency standards, the standards on appliances, the question about encouraging demand side programs, et cetera, and official forecast of demand of the future for electricity. And Dave, that was the interesting thing. What happened was, all the utilities in 1976 used to plan 10 years, 20 years ahead. And they used to take their demand and add 7% growth all the way, because that was traditionally since 1930, it was growing 7.5%. And it was correct, because it always meant 7.5%, because everybody thinks growing. And they said for 1985 and 1990, 7% growth will require 3 nuclear plants. As a matter of fact, Rand Corporation wrote a report saying, if the utility projections are right, then by 1990, every 2 miles will have a nuclear plant sitting on the coast of California. That was their quote. So Energy Commission took the responsibility of doing demand side kind of forecast. So they reduced the growth rate from 7% of utilities, and I'm saying it was all Southern California Edison Company, PG&E, San Diego, down to 2.5%, 2.5%, which is even higher than it is today. Because right now it's like 1.5 kind of thing. But they made 2.5, and it's such a big news in the newspaper. My God, utility, these socialists are trying to turn the economy down, and economy depends on electricity, et cetera, and there was a huge hue and cry. Anyway, it's an interesting story some other time. Go to the next one. But at this point in time, I understand that there is a little bit of resource shortage, maybe appearing at 4 to 9 p.m. This is the this is the section of area where the renewables are not available. At the same time, load is not coming down as fast. And projections are that there might be some tightening supply in that period. Right now, the imports are taking care of that. This gray area is non-contracted imports. Like these are emergency imports when CAISO has to import power from outside, even though nobody planned on it because they have to run the system in California. That thing right on the top is the imports not under contract, system reliability requirement. Imports under contract are already accounted for in the larger brown, okay? So they're saying there will be tightening of supply in California in next 2 years, a little bit, but not that much. Only in those hours. They're not saying energy is not enough. I think there's enough energy in our renewable projection. But how do we provide that component or that role? Next one. So that's when the risk comes in. How do you price energy? How do we sign 10-year contract? Siobhan does that all the time. She brings all kind of proposals to the board, and I think it's tough time because shortage means high prices. On the other hand, energy in terms of renewables, technology is getting better, it's getting cheaper, more of them. The government will be more proactively supporting it. It should go down in price. But at the same time, there are certain hours of the day which are still risky, like these 2 or 3 hours. So to me, it's a big issue which needs to be looked at in a holistic way. Like we can't look at one issue at one time. I think this is all connected. That's what's the theme of my presentation today, that all these things we're seeing right now, wildfire, renewable, energy, climate control, technology absorption in the future, new investments in transmission distribution, role of microgrids in the future, they're all connected. And I love to have discussions like these with intelligent people like you to create some kind of public feeling. We are all in it together. And I think nobody owns the future. Huh? So anyway, so these are the risks that we are taking, and I had a lot more material, but I think that's not important. What I like to do is to ask you for your questions and comments, whatever you want to talk about. And I've got 1,000 other slides right now, but I don't want to do that.
You see, one point which you mentioned about related to fires, once you stipulate that the provider has to give electricity whosoever wants, I mean, if you now analyze those fires which have taken place, where those areas that, towers or the electrical, very near to those for deep forests,
Yes.
it shouldn't have been sanctioned.
Yeah.
It is, world over, in this country only this kind of a thing is happening.
Yeah.
And I would say it is the American consumer, I can say, when you put a demand for everything, that no, we wish to give a guarantee that if you want, you can have it. So that kind of a thing, it comes at a price. So what he mentioned, that the damages which is caused to so many people, nobody cares about.
True.
The corporate greed is, corporate greed, or this free market system, what you call, is that social, objective of running these power companies or something. They shouldn't be chasing the stock market. It is a social responsibility. If you do not have social responsibility.
Yeah, well, I think that we need to have motivation, incentive for people to take risk and
You see, that is a free
invest
market.
too.
And by that, where you have come today, it is the versus, and it is all of us, what you mentioned, all of us that awareness.
That's a philosophy. Any other question? Yes.
So part of the response to that is, one of the reasons it's not happening in other countries is that in Europe and a lot of other countries, in the other countries there was ongoing management, communal management of forest resources. In Europe there is strong local responsible management of forests. And in the United States, there was Smokey the Bear.
I'll show
So
you.
there was
I need to put one
suppression
slide,
of
go.
The fires, it was basically genocide against the Indians, and the
Oh,
Indians
I see.
managed the forests nationwide
Here, go.
by a low-level burning on a regular basis. So by suppressing the low-level burning, you
Oh,
get
yeah.
crowded forests with all these trees competing with each other for water and nutrients. And so what we need to
Can you go
do
up?
to fix that is to thin those forests.
Oh, these are the whole,
turn-
all this line?
Turn most of them into
This one.
chemical feedstock and compost, and leave it the way the Indians.
Could you make it like a,
And then get back to the low-level burning, because that'll also provide food value. So the Indians say that the
Ah,
acorns grow bigger and
okay.
stronger, and a fungus that attacks one of the food, some of the food sources is suppressed by fire.
excuse me,
Yeah.
perhaps you can continue the dialogue. There's one slide I would like to show you. I wanted to show you because I made it specially for Dave, because the other day I was talking to him on the sideline. And I think you will be all interested. The question basically is that suppose I took a risk and invested in a renewable solar plant or a wind generated plant of 100 megawatts, maximum output 100 megawatts, okay? Suppose I did that. And I wanted to tell PUC, or CAISO actually, that I like to get credit for that, my power plant as part of your capacity market, or the, what we call RA market, you know, the resource adequacy market, because it's, I've got 100 megawatts, you know, like in our solar plants, we have got 350 megawatts. So we should be given credit for that 350 megawatts because we are actually completely owning the total output of that power plant. The Energy Commission of California comes in between and saying, no, wait. You might build it for 350 megawatts, but when I want it, it may not be 350 megawatts. It may be anywhere, depending on all the other factors of solar, cloud covers and all sort of thing. So I'm going to determine statistically how much credit you should get. That it's a probabilistic kind of thing. So California Energy Commission has been entrusted this task from CAISO and PUC to come out with that factor on each one of those resources for their capacity credit to get that RA. Now, until a couple of years ago, that number was estimated to be, if you put a typical power plant of that kind, let's say solar, and ran it for a year or 2 year or 10 year, whatever it is, and you stacked it on terms of its output, you know, during the day. They said 70%, like if you put it all in order from high to low output, at 70% of availability, the first top 170%, that's the amount they will credit. Like instead of 350 megawatts, 70% of the time it at least produced 200 megawatts, okay? So you will be given credit for 200 megawatts because it produced power of 200 megawatts or more 70% of the time. But recently they have changed it.
Who changed it?
California Energy Commission with PUC, working with PUC. So what they did, like in 2015, in July of 15, the power plant, the resource of the solar was approximately 65-70%, something like that. About 65%, like you will get credit for 65% of the capacity. In 2016, and this is the solar, and I think, yeah, this is the solar installed capacity, and this is the credit that you get for it. This ratio was 63% in 2015. It was lowered to 58% in 2015 by a methodology which is called effective load carrying capability. It's a statistical estimation process using Monte Carlos and all this sort of thing, which basically produces, in a very nutshell, in a simple way, you take your power plant, which you want to get the credit for, and they will run a simulation for a year, given the randomness of the solar question. Then in the next thing, they will replace that power plant with a perfect capacity, perfect power plant, which will be always so many megawatts every day for 365 days. Like it's like a battery, continuous available. And they will see how the system reliability is matched to be the same in two cases. Like how much of that perfect battery percent is going to come out with the actual reliability experienced by the system when your system was running, like your actual power plant. So you have two systems, one with your power plant, the other one with the ideal battery replacing a power plant, and then you keep on moving its kilowatt value up and down of the perfect, so that the net result of the reliability for the rest of the system is the same. It's basically replacement. So when they become the same, they say that's what is effective load carrying capability. It's a percent number of your original we call it nameplate capacity. Nameplate means stamped on the generator. Okay, 350 megawatts, that's the nameplate. How much the credit is getting, that's coming from the California Energy Commission. And the ratio is called ELCC, effective load carrying capability. The problem with that methodology is that more solar component you have of the total system, worse this number becomes. I'll give you an example. When there was 2016, the number was 58%, all right? When they ran the same thing in 2018 with much higher value of the solar capacity, see, capacity went from 7,400 to 16,000 something, solar. But the value of ELCC came down from 58% to 34%. So more solar you have, less credit you get for the same power plant. Like you had it for last 2 years. Last year your value was higher because everybody else didn't have the solar. But this year, the solar is, everybody is having solar, so your value has gone down. So this number is going down and is related to how much is installed. So I was thinking, our vision of when it's 100% renewables in the whole system, like no, it's going to be really a problematic thing. Like we have to look at this technology. We got to look at the methodologies here. Because I can't believe that just because you have everything solar and wind, that it's worth zero. Of course it's not worth zero. So
is that deliberately compensating on behalf of the gas plants?
No, I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that. I think you're concluding, I'm just saying the result of the study is, and I believe that these are run by professionals, so I'm not talking about it, but just the way the study is run. I wanted to show you this because this is what bothers me a lot. Because I think there's a fallacy into this calculation. Yeah.
I was wondering if when you have the extra solar that you're not getting compensated for it, you store that and then used it when the demand was high to sell it. Wouldn't you recoup your cost that way?
Oh yeah, you would, but I'm just saying currently without storage, without battery, just the solar itself, just its role in providing capacity when it's needed. That's the number they give.
So Enroll declared that 6 hours of storage was the sweet spot, and it would increase the value of every kilowatt hour that goes through the solar system by 3 cents, which is like a third or a half of the actual value of the electricity in itself. So you have this huge increase in the value of electricity because, and that's only considering load shifting and deferred expansion of the grid.
You're right, that's a good, could you send me the reference to that?
Right.
Okay. I didn't want to interrupt your discussion that we are taking place, but I thought this slide, because this one I really wanted to show, and it was at the end of my other presentation. Any other questions? But I think this we should take up somewhere along the line with somebody.
I'd like to just say one more thing. In the blue lines where the wind energy was, the earlier slide had a thin blue line that went all the way across, and that was on January 1st. And in the wintertime, that's exactly what it is. There's not a lot of wind, and it's consistently low all the way across. The slide a couple before this one was done in July. And this is soon, so basically what happens is that landmass in the Central Valley heats up, creates, and that air rises, creates a low pressure zone, and the air comes in through across the hills and increases the wind. And that wind is it's basically from March through October, that wind is there, and it peaks in July through September. And it also is diurnal, so from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. it builds up and then dies down. And that peak coincides with the peak demand when people get home. So CEC just put out a bid for, can we build towers and blade spars on site? And yes, we can. And they're asking for a 3-year project to do that. But once that's done, it'll be possible to really roll out wind energy that'll take advantage of that and double or triple that amount that was like this in the right hand.
Yeah, that was the slice.
Yeah.
Oh, excellent. All right.
We hear from time to time about being a provider of last resort. What does that mean?
Well, that's the implication that if we in Peninsula Clean Energy fold up for some reason or the other, right now the legal statutes are that every customer of Peninsula Clean Energy will be automatically gone to PG&E, and PG&E should be prepared to take them back and provide electricity. So all their supplies and everything has to be designed to accommodate them at that time. And so provider of last resort, Polar, is given special consideration for creating that capability in terms of extra capacity or contracts or whatever they want to do. And that role is the more political role rather than a factual role, because it was created when utilities were, IOUs were the natural monopoly.
Yeah.
They were by nature Polar, provider of last resort, by agreement. The PUC has gotten so used to it that Michael Picker, actually made this statement that the natural provider of last resort is distribution utilities, because they have been doing it and they're always there, it's their business, and other like direct access people and CCAs and others, they may come and go, so we can't depend on that. And to me it looks like it's a foolish thing, because if 50% of the power energy is coming from CCAs in the state, and the remaining 50% or less than 50%, because you have direct access customers too, they are the ones who are going to be prepared for the 100% of the pie as a provider of last resort. There will be a lot of wastage of resources.
50% waste.
Yeah, a lot of waste. So I think that debate should take place sometime. Instead of looking at provider of last resort to utilities, they should try to figure out how to strengthen CCAs so they become capable, or they can be guaranteed to be provider of last resort.
That argument could also go into the argument for CCAs taking over PG&E.
Well, that's a stretch, but
It doesn't seem like it works very well now, given the growth of CCAs.
no, it doesn't work at all. As a matter of fact, there's another mechanism by which PG&E charges our customers. That's called CAM, C-A-M, cost accounting method. So some time ago, the PUC approved this CAM charge where the facility helps all the customers, whether they're a PG&E customer or direct access customer or CCAs. But every customer has to pay, just like PCIA, that CAM charge.
Yeah.
And that could be improvement in the transmission, improvement in the distribution, or even generation, some places. And that CAM charge is such a gray box. I don't know what's inside it, what's outside it. But there's a lot of mystery in those kind of things.
It could be diverted to microgrids with sufficient political pressure.
If you run any microgrid campaign, I'm going to talk to you about that, because I think that's the answer.
So, and I won't, I won't take your word for it. I know you're an expert in the field, but so what does that mean for CCAs in the next 10, 20 years?
Oh, they will become de facto. Because to me, CCA is not just a same thing as buying power at the cheapest rate, like direct access customers. Most of the industrial commercial customers don't care about I shouldn't say don't care, but not care as much about environmental as our people do, CCA people do. To me, CCA offers three things that other people don't, including investor-owned utility. One, the input of community, you all. How many of you ever have gone to PG&E board meeting? How many are allowed to go into PG&E board members? You know, that's number. It's community. It's community. Number two, it's resources where they exist and people who can do something. We can talk about modifying our demand side, our supply side together. We can talk about our future together. We can create sensible solutions which work with each other. We can help each other out. So that's number two. Number three, it's an entity which is actually compatible with the clean environment, which is not a choice anymore. We got to have trajectory, whatever we choose, so that we can stop the damage. We can't undo the damage that we already done in that environment. But any future damage, and you know, my biggest issue with the environmental damaging technologies is that these damages are not reversible. Sometimes in my old risk management kind of environment, I used to think about options. Like an option can be to do a thing before you know everything about it, maybe like I take a risk kind of thing. Sometimes you say, well, why should I take an option? I'll wait till I get the answer. And then you can correct it. But in this case, when the environmental is damaged, that's it. If you found the solution 20 years from now, that 20 years ago I should have done that. 20 years ago I should have gotten the whole CCA thing started. The whole USA should have CCAs type of approach. I mean, that's no good. Actually, that's one of the things I wanted to, I told Jan, Dave, that when we talk of strategic planning, there are two ways of doing strategic planning. One is to do a whole bunch of these computer simulations, which we call Monte Carlo, you know, changing everything up and down, prices varying, et cetera, and come out with risk-averse technology kind of thing. But to me, the strategic planning is that there are two or three things that are staring at our faces that are really bad. Like if we don't do anything about the environment, where's it going to lead? Okay, that's one scenario. Other one is, suppose there's a new technology which will make our renewable resources not only controllable, but half the price. I mean, whatever it is, you know. And the third one is a rambling, slow approach like we are doing right now. Like every time we go incrementally, like we are still investing in transmission systems which are not pro-CCAs, which are not pro-renewable, which are not pro-distributed resources. But we keep on strengthening the old system of doing things, which becomes like a catch-22. Because our system does not allow the new technology, we can't put it in. But if you don't change the system, or if you don't start to make the change in the system, if you don't spend the next dollar not on the old, strengthening the old system, but bringing the germ of the new system, you'll never get started. So I think that those are the strategic planning I would like to do. Like think of the things where we can talk. We don't have to talk about 10,000 scenarios. Let's talk about 3 or 4 or 5 scenarios. How are we covered in Peninsula Clean Energy against those scenarios? How do we do? What are the things we should put in the ground so that, and this is what I learned in risk management. The thing is to imagine yourself that you're 5 years in the future, Back to the Future kind of movie. This time it's the future. And you're sitting there in the future looking back today. And basically knowing what you do for in the next 5 years, you want to do certain things at that time which you should do today, but you did not know. So what can we guess those things could be that we should be doing today? So if we have a few strategies, like strategy number 1, get as much solar as we want, get as much storage as we want, or build a microgrid and all this sort of thing, and we proceed. Then if we are 5 years from now looking back, we should say, hey, microgrid was great, but we should have done something else. We should have gotten, besides electrical vehicle, we should have gotten the trucks also as part of the thing, or highways or whatever. So instead of modifying the strategies then, let's try to figure out, can we modify the strategy today, planning ahead, looking back? You know, we used to call it, what was the name of this method? Catalyst. We used to call it catalyst. And the key point, which I was completely sold on, that any strategic planning has two outcomes. One is a report on the shelf that you have filed with the PUC, and nobody will read it. Next time when we make a decision, we just do whatever we do. The other one is strategic planning, which is a living, breathing communication to not only us, but to everybody else in the community, that they know what we think. They know what our mission is. They know where we are counting on them to do certain things. That's what strategic planning should be. Anyway, enough of the lecture.
And if we do 10 years after every piece of equipment goes in, it's producing free energy because you paid for it.
Anything else? If nothing else, thank you so much. I appreciate
Great.
I don't know whether you enjoyed, but I enjoyed very much. I love to talk to you, and I'm open to discussion anytime. Thank you all for
Thank
coming
you.
out this
Yeah, thank you.
Friday afternoon.
Great. Thank you.